The federal government has allocated approximately 4.83 trillion naira from the proceeds of Nigerian Treasury bills, NTBs, and bonds issued in 2040 to settle the Ways and Means advances from the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN. Now, this is according to the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun. Similarly, the CBN issued a total of 28 different exchange rates for import duties in the first quarter of 2024, while January saw a single stable rate. Businesses navigated a staggering 15 different exchange rates in February and 13 in March. Now, joining me for more on this is the Chief Economist at SPM Professionals, Paul Alaje. Thank you, Paul, for joining me today.
Thank you so very much for having me.
All right, so let me begin by getting your thoughts on this report, which says that the federal government has allocated approximately 4.83 trillion naira from the proceeds of NTBs and bonds issued in 2024 to settle Ways and Means advances from CBN. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we have continued the way of borrowings, and if you look at the 2024 budget, the single largest component of that budget is not what we are going to spend on security. It is not what we will spend on education. It is even not what we will spend on health. The single largest item in 2024 budget is debt service. And I didn't say debt repayment, it's debt service. So part of those money is what you have seen that have been mentioned by the Minister of Budget and National Coordinating Minister of the Economy, that Nigeria will be spending that humongous amount on servicing and perhaps some of the Treasury bills, bonds we've collected, as well as what we should pay to the Central Bank of Nigeria in terms of Ways and Means. In the coming period, it is expected that we might even be paying more. I have projected last year, December, that Nigeria's debt profile will climb up to 100 trillion naira by the end of this year, 2024. The interesting thing is that by the end of second quarter, no longer fourth quarter, Nigeria will certainly get to 100 trillion naira mark of debt. Exposure, both local and international debt or foreign debt, as you like, that Nigeria will now be owing. I think this amount is humongous, not just because, to mention the amount, I think it's huge. One, because of the reality of our revenue today. After removing fuel subsidy and devaluing the naira, taking the two steps together, it has implication. The first implication is that revenue line to government increased sporadically, but this increase also had implication on our debt profile. If you are using 800 or 1,000, as the case may be, whatever is reported by the Debt Management Office, it's also accountable for over 1 trillion naira increase in our debt profile. So we now need to service. Where are we going to get the money from? Is the money for service going to come from naira or the dollar? I think the former is the answer, which means we're going to be using the naira to service our debt. And that money is getting even more scarce as our sources of revenue is reducing. Thankfully, Mr. President removed subsidy, and the implication of subsidy is more money. But will this more money be enough to take us out of the woods in the light of humongous foreign debt and huge local debt, including exposure to the Central Bank of Nigeria by ways and means which our government have already collected, even the past government, including what this government have collected. Recall that whatever this government is paying is not just what they borrow, even what the previous government administration have borrowed. Servicing is very important for us to remain credible country when it comes to application for loans or selling our bonds or bills to the member of public or international community.
All right, I like your talk, talking about how that we need to look at what these loans are even expended on when you talked about the budget and all of that. But add to that, the government's borrowing of 2.94 trillion naira from the CBN through the same Ways and Means, in the latter half of 2023 for servicing of its domestic debts, even as the current finance minister had earlier stated that the president would adhere to the statutory limit. So what percentage of the government's revenue is 2.94 trillion naira, if I may ask? Because we know initially it was 5% until the National Assembly, adjusted it upwards. So if we're looking at, even if we're going to look at the 15% adjustment, does that, is that what we see here?
Well, government, the adjustment is 15% by the National Assembly. The 8th Assembly has moved that. Now, what we see is whether 2.4 is equivalent of our revenue. Now, it is not revenue projection for this year. It is actual revenue for last year. So 15% of what we got last year is certainly not up to 2.4 trillion. And this is where you need civil society to question and constitutional lawyer to ask questions. Unfortunately, the field of economy seems to be lonely in this regard. If we must collect up to 2.4 trillion naira, we are saying that we have generated in revenue far more than that. I know that we didn't even generate up to 24 trillion, if you want to talk about 24 trillion. Even the budget for last year is not up to 24 trillion. So asking for 2.4 trillion in ways and means, when we in fact generated less than, if you like, 30 trillion naira, or I beg your pardon, when we in fact generated far lower than 10% of that. I mean, 10% of it is not up to 2.4 trillion. So why should we be doing that? We just have to be careful so that we don't find ourselves in the ways of the past where we didn't have up to the amount we collected from ways and means went beyond half of previous year's revenue. Now, it took the National Assembly to help to correct the abnormality that took place between the central bank and the federal government of Nigeria. My concern here is, could it mean that we're about to start committing another financial mistakes by asking for 2.4 trillion when we know it's not up to 15%, when we know that 15% of what we generated last year is far below this. So I want to strongly believe that what we generated last year in revenue is not up to, if you like, 15 trillion naira. So if you do not generate up to 20 trillion naira, I beg your pardon, then why should we be asking for that huge amount of money? Because even if it's 20 trillion, you are 10% of it is just 2 trillion naira. So if you had then 2.5 trillion, but what we generated is not up to 21 trillion, then why should we be interested in collecting this amount of money? I believe authority speak directly to this information.
Okay, looking at this particular conversation, I mean, it's a two-way street in that on the one hand, you can say that we are attracting foreign inflows, we have foreign portfolio investors. But then looking at this, I remember what the minister said at a breakfast meeting, and he was saying that the government strategy of increasing the pricing of government securities has successfully attracted dollar inflows, but at a higher cost to the government. Now, how high is that cost, and what are the ramifications?
It's not just the higher cost to government that matters. It's also higher cost for local investor. It's higher cost for employment. It's higher cost for our growth. It is true that when NPR, this is the connection. When you increase NPR, that's monetary policy rate, government has buffer to increase window for borrowings, which certainly is what we have seen. And more investors local and abroad are coming to Nigeria, even though what we are seeing is still not up to what we expect to have as a nation and as a need. But the implications on domestic economy, which should be your concern. Nigerians that are watching this or that are watching in the future, they may say, how will this concern me? It will concern you. One, investors that want to invest in Nigeria and our local business people that want to invest, they would rather like to put their money with government at no stress, no cost, because government is going to pay higher return than to put the money in construction, where they will employ Dende from Kano or Ibrahim from Sokoto, or bringing Idowu from Ibadan, or bringing someone from Chinedu, from Inewi, or bring them on board. No, I would rather give my money to government in the name of Treasury bill and bonds, because the rates are high. When the rates are not high, people will prefer to put their money in real business and get people to work. Now, when this is not happening, when people are not going to work and people are not working as expected, what you are going to see is that if persists and interest rate keep going up, then you're going to see people, the economy might be thrown back into a recession of some sort. I'm not saying that will happen in the short term, but if this persists, you have seen 400 basis point increase from 18.75 to 22.75%. That's NPR increase. You have now seen another 200 basis points from 22.75 to 24.75. And this happened within 4 to 5 weeks. If this repeats itself, then I can tell you, by Nigeria escape 2024, then by second quarter 2025, if this rate increase, look at the condition. If we continue to increase rates in this manner, then Nigeria may eventually have zero growth. And if the care is not taken, we might go into a recession. Even now, if we have major distortion in the global economy, externalities may affect us, because already they said it is incentive to investing in real sector.
Let me come in here. I like what you have said, but
now, the best of central bank is to combat inflation. All of these have implications in our fiscal life.
All right, let me come in here. I like what you've said, but we have other economists and other analysts who are saying that whatever, the CBN is doing, the monetary policy or the monetary authority is doing, on its own part is actually very good for the economy because they cannot sit down and watch, money supply go haywire and all of that. And then on the other hand, they are saying that, I mean, if you look at it again, you're going to see that we're ability to attract investors. Naira is becoming stable. Of course, foreign portfolio investors anyway. Naira is becoming stable and all of that. And they are saying that, look, this is not going to continue forever. That on the other hand, we have the fiscal authority who are doing a lot more, maybe in terms of agriculture. And we're also seeing some good news, even in the oil and gas sector, production and all of that. So they're saying, when you look at all of those things, I mean, the tightening policy isn't for forever. They are saying that maybe in the short term, yes, but, with time, they might just, losing things up. What do you make of that?
Economics projection is based on the happening today, not what we think the authorities will do. It is the action that you take today that will determine what will happen. Let me give you an instance. A central bank has not intervened in the market by determining the price of export and import and what is happening in I&E window, as well as selling directly to BDCs. Naira would have gotten worse. Before they started doing that, we projected Naira to get to 1,500. It happened. We projected it to progress further to 2,000. It got to 1,950. The central bank sat up and felt, no, we cannot continue this free flow, expecting that the market will adjust itself. So central bank intervened in the market. We are saying as of now, as of today, if this policy continues with what we have seen, I'm afraid it might not be what those analysts, because economics is not about wishful thinking. From your comments, they said they hope that in the future that they will stop. We cannot decide that until we have seen the policy statement. What we deal with in economics is the number. And
all
the
right.
action that is taken today will certainly have implication for tomorrow. So if truly maybe they've heard, or there is a circular central bank issue that we're only going to do this for 2 months, which I don't have access to, then they may be right. When they don't have, it will be too dangerous a thing as economists to assume or to base your policy on mere assumption of what there is no communication, document or anything to back it on. Then you would only be practicing a wishful thinking.
All right, Paul, just before we go, we need to go in about 30 seconds now. The DMO is usually, it's always quick to say that it's debt management tactics, is sort of, watertight and all of that. But looking at what looks like a cyclical borrowing strategy that sees, new debts being used to service existing obligations, shouldn't even the most optimistic be concerned? Isn't this a cycle that's going to continue? And then for how long can we sustain this? If you can take that in 30 seconds.
Well, I think that is beyond the purview of DMO. DMO's job is to find Nigerian debt and look at how to use policy to manage as much as possible, get possible best rates for Nigeria. That's what they need to do. In servicing, it is revenue generated from government, from Minister of Finance, that go to the debt management office. DMO directly cannot tell how much or how we finance our debts. They will only work with Minister of Finance as to how that will be done. Because that we have a minister who is the chief there. So the job of the minister is to ensure that the numbers are put together before the DMO could tell you whether the optimism will be correct or not. For me, the DMO person is doing our best in managing the process. But if we're not generating enough revenue, DMO has no influence in what's happening in Niger data. Is here. You mentioned optimism in terms of crude, but are you also aware that the tax level in our crude is historic right now? What we are seeing right now because of shortage or reduction in our while the price is going on. If output were to be maintained, then we can talk of more revenue. But if that is not the case, then we can still be talking of concerns that we will see.
Thank you so much, Paul Alaje. We just have to end this here. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.